I do to you to deserve this?
The chains around Karipa's wrists weren't silver. They were worse. Wolfsbane forged iron, blessed by the high priestess herself under a blood oath that made even his wolf whimper in submission. His own mate, Luna Aroha of the Moonwater Pack, had locked him in the dungeons beneath their castle 3 months ago, and no one, not the council, not the pack warriors, not even his own brother, had questioned her right to do it. Because Karipa couldn't move, couldn't shift, couldn't even lift his head without the world spinning into darkness. The paralysis had come the night of the royal decree, the night the Southern Council discovered his bloodline wasn't just forbidden, it was the one thing that could destroy the entire pack hierarchy. And Aroha, the woman he'd marked as his Luna, the woman who'd sworn to stand beside him until the moon itself fell from the sky, had made her choice. She'd chosen pack law over him. Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because this story is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. The dungeon was cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you forget what warmth ever felt like. Karipa lay on the stone floor. His body twisted at an angle he couldn't correct, staring at the ceiling where moisture collected in dark patches that looked like continents on a map he'd never explore. He'd been the alpha of the Moonwater Pack for 7 years. 7 years of keeping their borders safe, of negotiating treaties with the northern clans, of holding the pack together through 2 wars and a famine that had nearly wiped out their food stores. 7 years of being the strongest, the fastest, the most feared alpha in the Southern Territories. And now he couldn't even scratch his own face. The paralysis had happened so fast. One moment he'd been standing in the Great Hall, the Southern Council surrounding him in a half-circle of judgment, and the next his legs had simply stopped working. He'd collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, his head cracking against the marble floor hard enough that he'd tasted copper. Aroha had screamed. He remembered that. Her voice cutting through the shocked silence like a blade. But she hadn't run to him. She'd stayed exactly where she was, 10 feet away. Her hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes wide with something that looked horribly like relief. That's when he'd known. That's when he'd understood that the poison running through his veins wasn't an accident, wasn't some curse from an enemy pack. It was her gift to him. Her solution to the problem he'd become. Because 3 days before the royal decree, Karipa had told her the truth about his bloodline. About his real father. About the forbidden heritage that made him both the rightful heir to the throne and the greatest threat to pack law anyone had ever seen. He was the son of Tawiri, the rogue king. The alpha who'd tried to overthrow the council 40 years ago. The wolf whose very name was forbidden to speak in any pack territory. And according to pack law, any heir to the rogue king's bloodline had to be executed on sight. Aroha had listened to his confession in their bedroom. Her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the windows. She'd been sitting on the edge of their bed, her hands folded in her lap, and she hadn't said a single word until he'd finished speaking. Then she'd looked at him with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I can't protect you from this." He'd believed her tears were for him, for them, for the life they'd built together. He'd been wrong. The next morning, she'd gone to the council herself. She'd told them everything, presented them with the proof she'd found. Documents Karipa hadn't even known existed, blood records from the old archives, testimony from wolves who'd known Tawiri personally. She'd handed him over like a criminal, and the council had called for his immediate execution. But Aroha had negotiated. She'd used every ounce of her power as Luna, every favor she'd accumulated, every alliance she'd built. And she'd convinced them to let him live. The poison she'd given him, slipped into his morning tea on the day of the royal decree, wouldn't kill him. It would just make sure he could never challenge the council's authority again. Never shift into his wolf. Never lead a pack. Never be anything more than a broken alpha, locked away where no one could see what pack law did to those who threatened its foundation. She'd saved his life by destroying it. And she'd done it all without ever asking if that's what he wanted. The door at the top of the dungeon stairs creaked open. Karipa heard footsteps, light, hesitant, descending into the darkness. Not Aroha's footsteps. She came twice a week, always at dawn, always alone. She'd stand at the bars of his cell and stare at him with those beautiful dark eyes that used to look at him like he hung the stars, and she'd tell him about pack business. About treaties and trade agreements and minor disputes between pack members. She'd talk to him like he was still her alpha, like he could still do something about any of it. She never apologized, never explained, never touched him. These footsteps were different, quicker, nervous. A young woman appeared at the bars, not Aroha, but someone Karipa had seen before in the castle halls. One of the kitchen maids. Marama, he thought her name was. She had dark hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that reminded him of the forest at midnight. She was carrying a tray with food, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at him. And her expression wasn't pity. It was fury. "Alpha Karipa," she said quietly, setting the tray on the floor and kneeling so she was at his eye level. "Can you hear me?" He managed to move his eyes toward her. It was all he could manage. Her jaw tightened. "I heard you last night, crying out. The Luna told the staff you were sleeping, that we shouldn't disturb you, but I heard you. You were in pain." He wanted to tell her it wasn't physical pain, that his body had gone so numb he barely felt anything anymore. But the pain in his chest, the agony of knowing his own mate had done this to him, that was the cry she'd heard. Marama reached through the bars. Slowly, carefully. She touched his hand where it lay twisted against his side. Her fingers were warm. "I'm going to help you," she whispered. "I don't care what pack law says. I don't care what the Luna commanded. This is wrong and I won't stand by and watch it happen." Karipa tried to speak, but his throat had forgotten how to make sounds that weren't screams. Marama squeezed his hand gently. "I know about your bloodline. About Tawiri. My grandmother was part of his pack before the uprising. She told me stories about him. Said he wasn't the monster the council claimed. Said he was trying to free us from pack law, not destroy it." She leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "She also told me something else. Something the council doesn't want anyone to know. There's a cure for wolfsbane poisoning. A ritual that can break its hold, but it requires 3 things. Moon water from the sacred spring, blood from a willing Luna, and the consent of the poisoned wolf." Karipa's heart, which had been barely beating for months, suddenly thundered in his chest. Moon water they could get. The sacred spring was deep in pack territory, but accessible. His consent he could give, even if he couldn't speak it. But blood from a willing Luna. Aroha would never agree. She'd locked him here specifically to keep him powerless. To keep the council satisfied. To maintain her position as Luna of a pack that would turn on her in a heartbeat if they thought she'd betrayed them. Marama seemed to read his thoughts in his eyes. "Not her," she said firmly. "There are other ways to become a Luna. Older ways. Blood oath ceremonies that predate the council's laws. My grandmother taught them to me before she died." She stood up, her hand slipping away from his. "I'll come back tomorrow night. And every night after that until we figure this out. You're not going to die in this cell, Alpha. I swear it on my grandmother's grave." She was gone before he could even process what she'd said. But for the first time in 3 months, Karipa felt something other than despair. He felt hope. And in a dungeon blessed by a blood oath and guarded by pack law, hope was the most dangerous thing in the world. Marama returned the next night, just as she'd promised. And the night after that. And the night after that. She brought him food that actually tasted like something other than ash. She brought him water that wasn't stale. She brought him blankets that didn't smell like mold and positioned them around his body so he wouldn't freeze when the temperature dropped in the early morning hours. But more than that, she talked to him. She told him about her life in the pack, about growing up in the castle as the daughter of a kitchen worker and a guard who'd died in the Northern War. She told him about her grandmother Hynero, who'd been a powerful wolf in her day, who'd fought alongside Tawiri in the uprising and barely escaped with her life when the council's forces crushed the rebellion. "She never forgave herself," Marama said one night, sitting cross-legged on the floor outside his cell. For surviving when so many others didn't. She said Tawiri had a vision for the packs. A world where power wasn't determined by bloodlines and royal decrees, where strength came from unity instead of dominance. Karipa managed to make a sound. Half grunt, half groan. Marama smiled sadly. I know. Sounds idealistic. Impossible. But my grandmother believed it to her dying breath. And when I look at you, at what pack law has done to you, I think maybe she was right to believe it. She reached through the bars again, her fingers finding his hand. It had become a ritual between them, this small touch. The only physical contact Karipa had experienced since Aroha stopped visiting 2 weeks ago. I've been researching the ritual, Marama continued. The blood oath ceremony that would make me a Luna. It's complicated but possible. The problem is that it requires witnesses. 3 wolves who can testify that the oath was taken freely and without coercion. Karipa's eyes widened slightly. I know, she said quickly. It's risky. Anyone who witnesses it would be defying the council, defying your mate, putting themselves in direct opposition to pack law. But I think I know 3 wolves who might be willing to take that risk. She paused, her grip on his hand tightening. Your brother Pakura, your former Beta Ringi, and a pack warrior named Wetu who served under you for 6 years. They've all been asking questions about your imprisonment. Quiet questions, careful questions, but questions nonetheless. They're loyal to you, Alpha. More loyal than you probably realize. Hope surged through Karipa again, stronger this time. His brother had always been his closest confidant, the one wolf he trusted above all others. If Pakura was questioning Aroha's decision, questioning the council's ruling, but then reality crashed back down. Pakura was mated to one of the council elders' daughters. Rengi had his own pack to think about now. His own responsibilities. Wetu was a single father with 2 young cubs who couldn't afford to lose his position in the guard. They'd all be risking everything to help him. Marama seemed to see the doubt in his eyes. I haven't approached them yet, she said softly. I wanted to ask you first. Even if you can't speak, even if you can't move, this is still your choice to make. Do you want me to try? Do you want me to risk their lives along with mine to give you a chance at freedom? It was the first time in 3 months anyone had asked Karipa what he wanted. Aroha had made every decision for him. The council had decided his fate without his input. Even the pack members who might have questioned his imprisonment had stayed silent, accepting the Luna's word as law. But Marama was different. She saw him not as a threat to be contained or a problem to be solved, but as a person who deserved agency over his own existence. Karipa focused every ounce of strength he had left into his right hand. Slowly, painfully, he managed to move his index finger. Just barely. Just enough. He tapped once against Marama's palm. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Okay, she whispered. Okay. I'll talk to them tomorrow. And Alpha. She leaned closer to the bars. Whatever happens next, you should know something. I'm not doing this because I pity you. I'm doing this because the first day I started working in the castle kitchens, I was being harassed by one of the senior warriors. He cornered me in the storage room and I was terrified. But you walked by, heard what was happening and you stopped it. You didn't just make him leave me alone. You had him removed from the guard entirely. And when I tried to thank you, you told me I didn't need to thank you for basic decency. She squeezed his hand one last time before standing. That's the wolf I'm fighting for. Not the alpha who carries a forbidden bloodline. Not the threat to pack law. Just the decent male who saw someone in trouble and helped them without expecting anything in return. After she left, Karipa lay in the darkness and remembered that day. He'd forgotten about it. It had seemed so insignificant at the time. Just another minor discipline issue in a pack of over 2,000 wolves. But to Marama it had mattered. It had mattered enough that she was willing to risk everything to save him. And somewhere in the castle above, his mate, the woman who'd sworn to love him until the stars burned out, was sleeping peacefully in their bed, content in the knowledge that she'd done what pack law required. Karipa had loved Aroha since the moment he met her. She'd been fierce and beautiful and strong, the daughter of the previous Alpha and every inch a born Luna. When she'd marked him in return, he'd thought they were unstoppable together. But he'd been wrong about what strength meant. Wrong about what love required. True strength wasn't following pack law blindly. It was choosing to stand against it when it demanded something unconscionable. True love wasn't making the practical choice. It was making the impossible one. Aroha had chosen practicality. She'd chosen survival. She'd chosen pack law. And Marama, a kitchen maid who owed him nothing, had chosen to save him anyway. 3 days later, Marama returned with 3 wolves following close behind her. Karipa recognized them immediately, even in the dim torchlight. Pakura, his younger brother, with the same sharp features and dark eyes their mother had given them both. Rangi, who'd been his beta before the paralysis, broad-shouldered and steady. And Wetu, smaller than the others but fierce, with scars on her arms that spoke of battles won. They all knelt outside his cell, their heads bowed. "Alpha," Pakura said, his voice rough with emotion, "we've come to witness the blood oath. We've come to stand with you against pack law." Karipa's chest tightened. His brother had always been cautious, always careful. For him to take this risk. "Don't try to talk me out of it," Pakura continued, as if reading his thoughts. "I know what I'm risking. My mate, my position, possibly my life. But you're my brother, Karipa. You raised me after our parents died. You taught me everything I know about being a wolf, about being a male worth respecting. I'm not going to abandon you now just because it's dangerous." Ringi spoke next. "You gave me my pack, Alpha. You could have kept me as your beta forever, but you saw that I was ready to lead and you helped me establish my own territory. I owe you everything." Wetu's voice was quieter. "You saved my cubs when the fever swept through the pack 4 years ago. You sat with them for 3 days straight, using your Alpha presence to keep them calm while the healers worked. My son still talks about the Alpha who held his hand and told him stories about the moon. I would walk into fire for you." Marama stepped forward, holding a ceremonial blade that looked ancient, probably had been Hainero's, passed down through generations. "We're ready when you are, Alpha." 1 tap for yes, 2 for no. Karipa tapped once, his finger barely moving against the stone floor. Marama unlocked the cell door. She must have stolen the key from Aroha's chambers, and entered. She knelt beside him, the blade gleaming in her hand. "The blood oath ceremony requires me to cut my palm and press it to yours," she explained. "Then I'll speak the old words, the ones that predate the council's laws. Pakura, Rangi, and Wetu will witness and acknowledge the oath. Once it's complete, I'll be bonded to you as Luna, not through the council's authority, but through the ancient pack bonds that existed long before royal decrees and forbidden bloodlines." She cut her palm quickly, not even flinching at the pain. Blood welled up, dark and rich. Then she carefully took Karipa's hand, the one he could still move slightly, and made a small cut on his palm. When she pressed their hands together, Karipa felt something surge through him. Not the wolfsbane that had been keeping him paralyzed, but something older, stronger. Well, Marama's voice rang out clear and powerful in the dungeon. "By blood and bone, by moon and earth, by the old ways that bind us to our wolves, I claim this Alpha as my own. I stand between him and harm. I fight beside him against injustice. I choose him freely, without coercion, without fear. Let the moon bear witness. Let the pack bonds acknowledge this truth." The 3 witnesses responded in unison. "We bear witness. We acknowledge this bond. We stand with the Luna and her Alpha." The moment the words left their mouths, something shifted in the dungeon. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and Karipa felt warmth spreading from his joined hand with Marama throughout his entire body. The wolfsbane was still there. He could feel it like chains around his wolf, but now there was something fighting against it. The Luna bond. Not the one Aroha had severed when she betrayed him, but the older, deeper bond that existed before the council had codified pack law. Marama's eyes widened. "Alpha," she whispered. "Can you feel that?" He tapped once. Gods, yes, he could feel it. The bond is trying to break the poison, she said, excitement creeping into her voice. It's fighting back. But we still need the moon water from the sacred spring. That's the final component. Pakura stood abruptly. I'll get it. The spring is 3 hours from here by wolf, and I can move faster than anyone. I'll leave now, be back before dawn. It's too dangerous, Rengi argued. The sacred spring is deep in pack territory. If anyone sees you, then I'll deal with it, Pakura said firmly. My brother needs this. I'm not going to fail him. He was gone before anyone could argue further. Weta moved closer to the cell. What about the Luna? Your actual mate. She's going to know something's wrong when she comes for her next visit and finds the cell unlocked, 3 witnesses standing guard, and a blood oath completed. Marama's expression hardened. Let her know. Let her see what real loyalty looks like. What real love looks like. She'll call the council, Weta warned. She'll have all of us arrested for defying pack law. I know, Marama said simply. That's why we need to complete the ritual before she arrives. Once the wolfsbane is purged and Alpha Karipa can shift again, the council will have a much harder time justifying his continued imprisonment. Rengi frowned. You're betting everything on him being strong enough to challenge them once he's healed. But Marama, even if the paralysis is cured, he's been weakened by months in this cell. He hasn't shifted, hasn't fought, hasn't even eaten properly. The council could still overpower him. Maybe, Marama agreed. Or maybe they've forgotten what he's capable of when he's fighting for something that matters. When he's not alone. She looked down at Karipa, and he saw steel in her gaze. You're not alone anymore, Alpha. We're with you. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The hours until dawn crept by with agonizing slowness. Rengi and Wetu took turns keeping watch at the top of the stairs, listening for any sign that someone was coming. Marama stayed with Karipa, talking to him about everything and nothing. Her grandmother's stories, her plans for the future, her fears about what would happen when Aroha discovered what they'd done. I don't hate her, Marama said at one point. Your mate. I understand why she made the choice she made. Pack law is absolute in her world. She grew up believing that the council's word was sacred, that defying them meant chaos and destruction. She probably thinks she saved you. Karipa made a sound, something between a growl and a whimper. Marama smiled sadly. I know. Saving you by destroying you isn't really saving at all, is it? But that's what pack law does. It convinces us that following the rules is more important than protecting the people we love. It makes us believe that power structures matter more than individuals. And it punishes anyone who questions that belief. She squeezed his hand. My grandmother used to say that Tawiri's greatest crime wasn't trying to overthrow the council. It was showing the packs that another way was possible. That we didn't have to live under their authority. That we could choose our own leaders, make our own laws, build our own futures. The council couldn't allow that vision to spread. So they destroyed him and everyone who followed him. And they made sure that 40 years later, his name is still forbidden. His bloodline still cursed, so that no one ever forgets the price of rebellion. Karipa focused on her face, wishing desperately that he could speak. 'Cause she understood. She understood everything he'd never been able to articulate, even to himself. The weight of his bloodline, the burden of his heritage, the impossible position of being the heir to both the pack he'd led and the rebellion that had nearly destroyed them all. When you're healed, Marama continued, when you can shift again and stand before the council, what will you do? Will you try to reclaim your position as Alpha? Will you challenge pack law directly? Or will you run, find somewhere far from here where your bloodline doesn't matter? He thought about it. Really thought about it for the first time since Aroha had locked him in this cell. Part of him wanted to run. To leave the Moonwater pack behind, to find a place where he could be just Karipa. Not the Alpha, not the Rogue King's son, not the threat to pack law. Be free. But another part, the part that had led this pack for 7 years, that had fought for them and bled for them and nearly died for them, couldn't walk away. Not when the system that had broken him was still breaking others. Not when pack law was still forcing wolves to choose between the rules and their conscience. He tapped once against Marama's palm. She understood immediately. "You're going to fight," she said softly. "You're going to challenge them." Another tap. "Even though it might cost you everything. Even though the council will bring every ounce of their power down on you." "Good," Marama said, and there was satisfaction in her voice. "Because I didn't risk everything to save a wolf who'd just run away. I risked everything for an alpha who'd finish what his father started." Just before dawn, Pakura returned. He was in wolf form, a massive dark creature with Karipa's same eyes, and he was carrying a sealed vial in his jaws. Moon water from the sacred spring, glowing faintly with its own internal light. He shifted back to human form, breathless and covered in scratches. "I was seen," he panted. "2 of the council's guards spotted me at the spring. They'll report back within the hour. We need to do this now." Marama took the vial with trembling hands. "Are you ready, Alpha?" Karipa tapped once, putting every ounce of determination he had into that single movement. The ritual was simple but brutal. Marama had to pour the moon water directly onto the wolfsbane-forged chains while speaking words of unbinding, then press her cut palm, freshly reopened, directly against Karipa's heart. The moment the moon water touched the chains, Karipa's body convulsed. The wolfsbane poison fought back violently, sending waves of agony through him that made him want to scream. But his paralyzed throat couldn't even manage that. Marama pressed her bloody hand to his chest, right over his heart, and power exploded through the bond between them. This was nothing like his bond with Aroha had been. That had been gentle, warm, comfortable. This was wildfire, a connection so intense it felt like his skin was burning away to reveal something raw and primal underneath. "Fight it," Marama commanded, her voice ringing with Luna authority. "Fight the poison. Come back to us. Come back to your pack." Karipa's wolf, which had been silent and dormant for 3 months, suddenly surged forward. Not completely, the wolfsbane was still too strong, but enough. Enough to give him a single moment of movement. His hand, the one joined with Marama's, clenched into a fist. Then his other hand moved. Then his legs. He screamed. Actually screamed. The sound ripping from his throat like it was tearing him apart from the inside. "That's it," Marama encouraged. "Let it out. Let the poison know you're stronger than it is." The wolfsbane chains began to crack. Hairline fractures spreading across the blessed iron, moon water seeping into the breaks, Luna blood feeding power into his wolf. And then, with a sound like thunder, the chains shattered. Karipa collapsed onto the stone floor, gasping, his whole body shaking. But he could move. He could feel his limbs responding to his commands. He could feel his wolf, battered but alive, pressing against his consciousness. "Alpha!" Pakura dropped to his knees beside him. "Brother, can you hear me?" Karipa opened his mouth, and for the first time in 3 months, words came out. They were rough, barely more than a rasp, but they were words. "I hear you." The 4 wolves around him, his brother, his former beta, a loyal warrior, and the kitchen maid who'd become his Luna through blood and moon water and sheer defiant courage, all broke into tears. But their celebration was short-lived. The dungeon door slammed open at the top of the stairs, and Aroha's voice rang out, sharp with fury. "What have you done?" Aroha descended the stairs like a vengeful goddess, her dark hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes blazing with rage. Behind her came 5 council guards, all in their formal armor, all carrying weapons blessed to kill even the strongest alpha. She stopped at the cell door, taking in the scene. The shattered chains, Karipa sitting up on his own, Marama kneeling beside him with blood still on her palm, and the 3 witnesses standing protectively between them and the Luna. "You broke pack law," Aroha said, her voice cold. "All of you. You performed a blood oath without council approval. You defied the royal decree. You freed a wolf who was imprisoned for the safety of the entire pack." Karipa forced himself to stand. His legs shook, his vision swam, but he stood. And he looked his mate, his former mate, directly in the eyes. "You poisoned me," he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "You locked me in a cell and left me to rot. You chose pack law over the male you swore to love." Aroha's expression didn't change. "I chose the pack. I chose the thousands of wolves who depend on us for protection and leadership. Your bloodline made you a threat to all of them." "My bloodline," Karipa repeated slowly, "comes from a wolf who wanted to free the packs from the council's tyranny, who believed that power shouldn't rest in the hands of a few elders who inherited their positions, who thought wolves deserved to choose their own destiny." "He was a traitor," Aroha snapped. "A rebel who caused the deaths of hundreds of wolves with his delusions of revolution. He was my father." Karipa took a step forward, and the guards tensed. "And you knew that before we became mates. I told you everything about my heritage when we first met. You said it didn't matter. You said you loved me for who I was, not for my bloodline." For the first time, something flickered in Aroha's eyes. Guilt maybe. Or regret. That was before I understood what it meant. Before I realized that the council would never allow Tawiri's heir to lead a pack. Before I knew they'd tear the Moonwater pack apart if I didn't handle the situation. "Handle the situation," Marama repeated, standing up. "You mean destroy your mate to appease wolves who've been dead for 40 years. Aroha's gaze shifted to her, and the temperature in the dungeon seemed to drop. "Ooh, kitchen maid. You think you can challenge a Luna? You think a blood oath performed in secret, without council approval, without proper ceremony, makes you anything more than a criminal?" Marama lifted her chin. "I think it makes me the wolf who stood by her alpha when his actual mate abandoned him." The guards moved forward, but Karipa's voice stopped them. It was still rough, still weak, but it carried the unmistakable weight of alpha command. "Don't!" Every wolf in the dungeon froze. Even Aroha, despite herself. Because Karipa might have been paralyzed for 3 months, might have been poisoned and broken and locked away, but he was still an alpha. Still the wolf who'd led the Moonwater pack through wars and famine. Still powerful enough that his command made even his enemies hesitate. "This ends now," he said. "Not with more violence. Not with arrests and trials and bloodshed. We're going to walk out of this dungeon, and we're going to present our case to the council directly." Aroha laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The council already made their decision. They ordered your imprisonment. They'll order your execution the moment they see you've been freed. Then let them try." Karipa's wolf pressed forward, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes flashed with golden light. He wasn't strong enough to shift yet, but his wolf was there, fighting alongside him. "Because I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending that pack law is more important than justice. And I'm done letting the council decide who deserves to live and who deserves to be thrown away." He looked at each of his allies in turn. "Anyone who wants to leave now, I won't hold it against you. This fight isn't yours. You've already risked enough." None of them moved. Pakura stepped forward. "We're with you, brother. All the way." Ringi nodded. "My pack will back you when the council calls for a vote." Weta bared her teeth in a feral grin. "I've been waiting for an excuse to tell those pompous elders what I think of their laws." And Marama took his hand and squeezed it. "You're not alone anymore, Alpha. Remember." Aroha watched this display of loyalty with something complex shifting across her face. Then she straightened her shoulders and addressed the guards. "Arrest them all. We'll let the council sort this out." But before the guards could move, a new voice echoed down the stairwell. "The council is already here, Luna Aroha. And we'd very much like to hear what Alpha Karipa has to say." Elder Hakawakawa appeared at the top of the stairs, the oldest member of the Southern Council and the only one who'd personally lived through Tawiri's uprising. She was ancient, her face lined with the weight of centuries, but her eyes were sharp and clear. Behind her stood the other 4 council elders, each looking various degrees of shocked and angry. This was it. The moment that would determine not just Karipa's fate, but possibly the fate of every wolf who'd ever questioned pack law. The elder descended the stairs slowly, leaning heavily on her staff. When she reached the bottom, she studied Karipa for a long moment. "You look like him," she said finally. "Your father. Same eyes. Same stubborn set to your jaw." Tawiri had that same look when he came before the council 40 years ago and told us our laws were unjust. Karipa said nothing, waiting. Elder Hakawakawa's gaze shifted to the shattered chains on the floor, to Marama's bloodied palm, to the witnesses standing defiant despite facing the full power of the council. "A blood oath," she murmured. "I haven't seen one of those performed in 60 years. The old ways, before we codified everything into law and structure. Before we decided that tradition mattered more than truth." Another elder, Tumatawenga, a massive wolf known for his rigid adherence to protocol, stepped forward. "Elder Hakawakawa, this is not the time for nostalgia. These wolves have committed treason. They freed a prisoner condemned under pack law, they performed an illegal ceremony, and they stand in direct defiance of our authority." "Our authority," Hakawakawa repeated, her voice dry. "Yes, let's talk about that. Tell me, Tumatawenga, where does our authority come from?" The elder looked confused. "From pack law. From generations of tradition. From fear," Hakawakawa interrupted. "From the same fear that made us crush Tawiri's rebellion 40 years ago. Not because he was wrong, but because we were terrified of what would happen if we admitted he was right." Shocked silence filled the dungeon. Aroha was the first to break it. "Elder, with respect, you can't possibly be suggesting that the Rogue King was justified in his actions. He nearly destroyed the entire pack structure. He questioned whether that structure deserved to exist," Hakawakawa corrected. "And instead of engaging with his arguments, instead of considering that maybe, just maybe, our system was flawed, we declared him a traitor and hunted down everyone who agreed with him." She turned back to Karipa. "Including your mother. I was there the day we executed her, you know. She was pregnant with you at the time. 5 months along. We could have waited, could have let you be born before we carried out the sentence. But we were making a point. We were showing every wolf in every pack what happened to those who defied us." Karipa's breath caught. He'd known his mother had been executed while pregnant. Aroha's documents had included that detail. But hearing it from someone who'd witnessed it, who'd participated in that decision. "She begged," Hakawakawa continued, her voice hollow. "Not for her own life. She knew that was forfeit. But she begged us to let her child be born. Promised she'd accept execution the moment the birth was complete. Do you know what we told her?" No one spoke. "We told her that her child was already condemned. That the bloodline was cursed. And any heir to Tawiri would only spread his poison to a new generation. We told her we were doing the merciful thing by ending 2 lives instead of 1. She looked at each council member in turn. But she survived, didn't she? The healer we sent to carry out the execution couldn't do it. Couldn't kill a pregnant wolf and her unborn child. So she helped your mother escape instead, falsified the death records, and sent her to the Northern Territories where she gave birth to you in secret." Karipa's world tilted. "The healer. She was banished. I remember hearing stories about a wolf who betrayed the council." "We," Hakawakawa said softly. "Her name was We, and yes, when we discovered what she'd done, we banished her. Stripped her of her pack, her position, everything. She died alone in the wilderness 5 years later." The elder's ancient eyes filled with tears. "She was my daughter." The revelation hit like a physical blow. "You helped my mother escape," Karipa whispered. "Your own daughter defied the council to save me, and you punished her for it?" "I followed pack law," Hakawakawa said, but her voice cracked. "I chose the rules over my child, just as Luna Aroha chose them over you. And I have spent every day of the last 40 years wondering if we was the brave one and I was the coward." She stepped closer to Karipa, close enough that he could see the weight of decades in the lines of her face. "So when I heard that Tawiri's son had risen to become alpha of the Moonwater Pack, When I heard that he was strong and just and everything his father claimed he wanted to build a better world for, I thought perhaps we'd been given a second chance. A chance to do what we should have done 40 years ago. Listen instead of condemn. Tumatawenga's face had gone purple with rage. You knew. You knew he was the Rogue King's heir and you said nothing. I suspected, Hakawakawa corrected. But I had no proof until Luna Aroha brought her evidence to the council. And by then, you'd all already decided his fate. She looked at Aroha with something like pity. Just as you'd decided his fate the moment you discovered the truth, hadn't you, Luna? You didn't even consider fighting for him. You went straight to the council and handed him over. Aroha's composure finally cracked. What choice did I have? If I'd tried to protect him, they would have seen it as conspiracy. They would have stripped me of my position, possibly executed me alongside him. I had to think of the pack. You had to think of yourself, Marama cut in, her voice sharp. You had to protect your position, your power, your comfortable life at the top of the hierarchy. And you sacrificed your mate to do it. You know nothing about the responsibilities of being a Luna. Aroha shouted, whirling on her. You're a kitchen maid who thinks performing one blood oath makes you fit to judge me? I have led this pack through crises you can't even imagine. I have made impossible decisions to keep thousands of wolves safe. I have. You have forgotten what it means to love someone more than you love power, Karipa said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. That's what my father understood. That's what we understood when she saved my mother. That's what Marama understood when she chose to help me despite having everything to lose. He took a step toward Aroha, his legs still shaking but his voice steady. Love isn't practical. It isn't safe. Doesn't make strategic sense. But it's the only thing that matters when everything else is stripped away. And you chose to strip it away yourself rather than fight for it. Aroha's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I did love you. I still. She stopped, swallowed hard. But love isn't enough when pack law says otherwise. Then pack law is wrong, Karipa said simply. Tumatawenga snarled. This is exactly the kind of dangerous thinking that led to the uprising. You see, elders. This is why the bloodline must be ended. He's just like his father, spreading dissent, encouraging rebellion. He's asking us to think, Hakawakawa interrupted. To consider whether our laws serve the wolves or just the wolves in power. And before you rage at me for saying it, Tumatawenga, ask yourself this. When was the last time the council made a decision that actually helped a common pack member? When was the last time we prioritized justice over order? The other elders exchanged uncomfortable glances. Hakawakawa continued, her voice gaining strength. We've spent 40 years telling ourselves that Tawiri was a monster because the alternative, admitting that we destroyed him to protect our own power, was too painful to face. But his son stands before us now, and what has he done? Led his pack with honor, protected the weak, made fair judgments. The only crime he's committed is existing with the wrong bloodline. The bloodline is cursed, another elder insisted. Pack law is clear. Pack law, Hakawakawa said, slamming her staff against the stone floor, was written by wolves who wanted to ensure that power stayed in their families, that bloodlines remained pure, that no one could challenge their authority without being labeled a traitor. We dress it up in tradition and ritual, but at its core, pack law exists to protect those of us standing in this dungeon right now. Not the wolves we claim to serve. She turned to address all the elders. I propose we do something we should have done 40 years ago. We put it to a vote. Not a council vote, a pack vote. Every adult wolf in the Moonwater Pack gets to decide. Do we uphold a law that condemns wolves for their bloodline, or do we judge Alpha Karipa by his actions? That's not how pack law works. Tumatawenga protested. The council decides. The council has been deciding for too long, Hakawakawa said firmly. And look what our decisions have given us. An alpha paralyzed and imprisoned by his own mate, a blood oath performed in secret because wolves were too afraid to seek proper channels, and a pack divided between those who follow orders and those who follow their conscience. If we don't change now, we'll fracture. And this time, the rebellion won't fail. Karipa felt something shift in the air. The other wolves in the dungeon, the guards, the elders, even Aroha, all seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Pakura stepped forward. If it helps, Elder Hakawakawa, my pack will support a vote. We're a smaller territory, but we have 300 wolves who deserve a voice in this decision. Ringi nodded. The Riverside pack agrees. 500 wolves ready to participate. One of the guards, a young male Karipa recognized as Tane, cleared his throat nervously. Permission to speak, elders. Tumatawenga looked ready to deny it, but Hakawakawa nodded. Granted. I've served in the castle guard for 8 years, Tane said. I've watched Alpha Karipa lead this pack through 2 wars and a famine. I've seen him make difficult decisions, seen him put pack welfare above his own comfort, seen him treat even the lowest-ranked wolf with respect. And I've seen Luna Aroha imprison him in this dungeon for 3 months without trial, without recourse, without mercy. He glanced at Aroha, his expression torn. With respect, Luna, that's not justice. That's fear masquerading as duty. Other guards were nodding now. Even some who'd come prepared to arrest Karipa and his allies. Aroha looked around at the shifting loyalties, at the wolves who'd served under her questioning her decisions, and something in her seemed to break. Fine, she said, her voice hollow. Put it to a vote. Let the pack decide whether to follow pack law or follow a romantic notion that bloodlines don't matter. They don't, Marama said softly. What matters is who you are when you have power. Whether you use it to protect or to control. Whether you see other wolves as people who deserve agency or problems to be managed. Aroha's gaze locked on her. You think you understand what it means to be Luna after one blood oath ceremony. You think you can lead a pack, make impossible choices, bear the weight of thousands of lives depending on your decisions. I think I can try, Marama replied. And I think I can do it without sacrificing the wolf I love to appease those in power. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Karipa turned to Elder Hakawakawa. When will the vote take place? Tonight, she said immediately. At moonrise. We'll gather every adult wolf in the territory at the ceremonial grounds. You'll have a chance to speak, to present your case. The council will present theirs. And then the pack will decide. Tumatawenga looked horrified. You can't be serious. This is unprecedented. We'll be setting a precedent that undermines the entire structure of pack law. Good, Hakawakawa said bluntly. Perhaps it's time that structure was undermined. Perhaps it's time we remembered that packs existed long before the council did, that wolves were choosing their own leaders and making their own decisions for millennia before we decided to codify everything into rigid hierarchy. She looked at Karipa one more time. You have 8 hours, Alpha. Use them wisely. Because if you lose this vote, if the pack chooses pack law over you, the council will have no choice but to carry out the original sentence. Execution at dawn. The 8 hours before moonrise felt both endless and far too short. Karipa emerged from the dungeon into a castle that felt simultaneously familiar and alien. He'd walked these halls for 7 years as Alpha, had made decisions in every room, had marked his territory in every corner. But now he was walking through it as a condemned wolf on borrowed time, and everything looked different. Marama stayed by his side, her presence a steady anchor. The blood oath between them was still new, still raw, but it was also undeniably powerful. He could feel her emotions through it, her determination, her fear, her absolute certainty that they were doing the right thing. Pakura, Rangi, and Wetu spread out through the castle and beyond, speaking to wolves they trusted, explaining what had happened, building support for the vote. But they all knew it would be close. Pack law had governed these territories for generations. Many wolves would be too afraid to vote against it, no matter how unjust they found Karipa's imprisonment. Aroha had disappeared into her chambers, their chambers once, and hadn't emerged. Karipa found himself in the Alpha's office, staring at the desk where he'd signed treaties and judged disputes and planned strategies to keep the pack safe. Everything here was exactly as he'd left it 3 months ago, down to the unfinished report sitting on the corner of the desk. "Strange, isn't it?" Marama said from the doorway. "How quickly a life can be taken away. How quickly you can go from being the most powerful wolf in the territory to being a prisoner in your own home." Karipa turned to look at her. Really look at her. She was young, maybe 25, and she'd been working in the castle kitchens for years without him paying her much attention beyond that one incident with the harassing warrior. But now, bonded to him as Luna, she radiated a quiet strength that made him understand why the old blood oaths had been so powerful. "Why did you really do it?" he asked. "The truth. Not the story about me helping you once. Why risk everything for a wolf you barely knew?" Marama entered the office, closing the door behind her. "Because my grandmother told me something before she died. She said that Tawiri's vision wasn't just about overthrowing the council. It was about building a world where wolves didn't have to choose between their conscience and their survival. Where doing the right thing didn't mean losing everything." She sat on the edge of the desk. "And when I heard you crying in that dungeon, when I saw what Pack Law had done to you, reduced the strongest alpha in the Southern Territories to a broken male locked in darkness, I realized that nothing had changed in 40 years. We still live in a world where power matters more than justice. Where following orders is valued over following your heart. And I thought," her voice caught, "I thought if I didn't try to change that, if I didn't stand up when it mattered, then what was the point of my grandmother's stories? What was the point of we sacrificing everything to save you? What was the point of any of it?" Karipa crossed the distance between them and took her hands. "After tonight, after the vote, if we lose, you need to run. Take my brother, take Rengi and Wetu, and get as far from council territory as possible. Don't let them execute you for my crimes." "They're not your crimes," Marama said fiercely. "And I'm not running. We face this together, remember? Whatever happens. Even if whatever happens means death. Especially then." She squeezed his hands. "Besides, we're not going to lose. Have faith in this pack. In the wolves you led for 7 years. They know who you are. They know what you've done for them. And when given the choice between following an unjust law and protecting their alpha, I believe they'll choose right." Karipa wished he shared her certainty. But he'd seen how pack law worked, how it twisted good wolves into instruments of oppression because they were too afraid to question the system. He'd seen it turn Aroha, the woman he'd loved, the Luna he'd trusted, into someone who could poison him and call it mercy. There was a knock at the door. Pakura entered, his expression grim. "We have a problem." "Course they did. The council is spreading word that you've been corrupted by your bloodline," Pakura explained. "They're telling wolves that the paralysis was actually protecting you from a curse, that freeing you has released something dangerous. They're framing this vote as a choice between safety and chaos." Karipa felt his wolf surge forward, angry. "That's a lie. The paralysis was poison, Aroha's poison, and they know it." "They know it," Pakura agreed. "But half the pack doesn't. And the wolves who are already afraid of your heritage will use this as justification to vote against you." Marama stood abruptly. "Then we need to tell the truth. All of it. Not just about the poison but about why Aroha chose to use it. About the council's fear of losing power. About what really happened 40 years ago with Tawiri. The council will never allow that," Pakura warned. "They'll stop the vote before they let you reveal their role in the uprising." "Let them try," Karipa said, his voice hard. "Because I'm done protecting their secrets. I'm done pretending that pack law is sacred when it's just a tool to keep certain wolves in power. If I'm going to die tonight, it'll be after speaking the truth." He looked at his brother. "How many wolves do we have supporting us?" "Confirmed. Maybe 400 out of 2,000. Another 300 who might vote our way if the testimony is compelling enough. The rest." Pakura shook his head. "They're too afraid, too indoctrinated, or too invested in the current system to risk change." The math was brutal. They needed at least 1,000 votes to win, and they had less than half that number. But Karipa had faced worse odds before. He'd led the pack through a war where they'd been outnumbered 3-1. He'd survived the famine by making impossible decisions about resource allocation. He'd built his entire leadership on doing what needed to be done even when it seemed impossible. He just had to hope that his pack remembered that when they cast their votes. Moonrise came too quickly. The ceremonial grounds were located at the heart of pack territory, a massive clearing surrounded by ancient trees that had witnessed generations of pack gatherings. Tonight, it was filled with over 2,000 wolves in human form, all gathered under the rising moon to decide the fate of their alpha. The council sat on an elevated platform, their formal robes making them look like judges at a trial, which Karipa supposed they were. He stood at the center of the clearing with Marama beside him, Pakura and Rengi and Wetu forming a protective half-circle behind them. Aroha was on the platform with the council, her face carefully neutral, her hands folded in her lap. Elder Hakawakawa stood and addressed the assembled pack. "We are here tonight to vote on a matter of pack law. Alpha Karipa has been accused of carrying a forbidden bloodline, of being the heir to Tawiri, the rogue king. According to our laws, this bloodline is cursed, and any heir must be executed to protect the pack from the poison of rebellion." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. However, Hakawakawa continued, Alpha Karipa has served this pack with honor for 7 years. He has led you through wars and famine. He has made difficult decisions and carried burdens that would break lesser wolves. And so we face a question. Do we judge him by his bloodline or by his actions? She gestured to Karipa. The Alpha will speak first. Then the council will present our position. And then you will vote. Majority rules. This is democracy, wolves. Perhaps the first true democracy this pack has seen in 40 years. Tumatawenga looked ready to object, but Hakawakawa silenced him with a glare. Karipa stepped forward. His legs still weren't completely steady. 3 months of paralysis had weakened muscles that had once been powerful enough to take down enemies twice his size. But he stood tall, projecting strength he wasn't sure he truly felt. "I am the son of Tawiri," he began, his voice carrying across the clearing. "The council's documents are correct about that. My father led an uprising 40 years ago, attempting to overthrow the system that governs our packs. He failed. He was executed, along with hundreds of wolves who followed him. And the council declared that his bloodline was cursed, that any heir would carry the poison of rebellion." He paused, letting that sink in. "But I want to ask you all something. What was my father rebelling against? What was so terrible about the council's rule that hundreds of wolves were willing to die rather than continue living under it?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "He was rebelling against this," Karipa continued, gesturing to the platform where the council sat. "Against a system where 5 wolves make every important decision for thousands. Where bloodlines determine worth. Where questioning authority is considered treason. Where loyalty to pack law matters more than loyalty to each other." His voice rose. "My father believed that wolves deserved to choose their own leaders. To make their own laws. To live in a world where power came from the trust of the pack, not from inherited position. And the council killed him for it. They killed my pregnant mother for it. They would have killed me before I was born if a healer named we hadn't risked everything to save me." He looked directly at Elder Hakawakawa. That healer was Elder Hakawakawa's daughter. She was banished for her mercy. She died alone in the wilderness because she believed that executing an unborn child was wrong, regardless of what pack law demanded. Gasps echoed through the clearing. "And here we are 40 years later facing the same choice," Karipa said. "The council wants you to execute me for the crime of existing with the wrong bloodline. They want you to believe that I'm dangerous, that I carry some curse that will poison the pack. But I've led you for 7 years. You've seen what kind of alpha I am. You've seen the decisions I make, the wolves I protect, the values I uphold." He turned to face the crowd directly. "So I'm asking you to judge me not by my father's actions, but by my own. Not by pack law but by your own conscience. And if you decide that bloodline matters more than character, that following rules matters more than doing what's right, then I'll accept your judgment. But at least make it your own judgment, not one forced on you by wolves who are more interested in maintaining their power than in serving this pack. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Tumatawenga rose. His face flushed with anger. You speak of choice and democracy, but what you're really advocating is chaos. Pack law exists because without it we would tear ourselves apart. Wolves are not meant to govern themselves. We need structure, hierarchy, clear rules that everyone follows. Your father understood that and tried to destroy it anyway. And now you stand before us asking us to make the same mistake he did. The elder's voice boomed across the clearing. I was there 40 years ago. I saw what Tawiri's rebellion cost us. Hundreds dead. Packs fractured. Territories in chaos. It took us decades to rebuild what he destroyed in his quest for freedom. And now his son wants us to risk that devastation again. Several wolves in the crowd nodded, murmuring agreement. Marama stepped forward suddenly. Then let me ask you something, Elder Tumatawenga. If pack law is so perfect, if the council's wisdom is so absolute, why did Luna Aroha have to poison her own mate to uphold it? Every eye turned to Aroha. The Luna stood slowly, her composure finally cracking. I did what I had to do. The council demanded Alpha Karipa's execution. I negotiated for his life. By paralyzing him, Marama interrupted. By poisoning him with wolfsbane and locking him in a dungeon where he couldn't move, couldn't shift, couldn't even speak. You call that mercy? I call it survival. Aroha shouted, her careful control shattering. Do you know what the council threatened to do if I didn't handle the situation? They were going to declare the entire Moonwater Pack compromised. They were going to dissolve our territory, scatter our wolves to other packs, strip me of my position and execute Karipa publicly as a warning to anyone who might sympathize with Tawiri's vision. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I had 2,000 wolves to protect. 2,000 lives that would be destroyed if I didn't make the hard choice. So yes, I poisoned him. I locked him away. I broke his heart and mind to save everyone else. That's what being Luna means. Making impossible choices so your pack can survive. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. But you didn't save me, Karipa said quietly. You destroyed me. And you told yourself it was mercy because you couldn't face what you'd really done. Chosen your position over your mate. Chosen pack law over love. Aroha looked at him with devastated eyes. I chose the pack. I would make the same choice again. I know, Karipa said. That's why we can never be mates again. Because I need someone who would choose me even when it costs everything. Even when it defies pack law. Even when it means losing power and position and everything we've built. He turned to Marama, taking her hand. Someone like her. The Luna bond between them flared visible for a moment, a shimmer of golden light that made several wolves gasp. This is the choice before you, Karipa addressed the crowd again. You can vote to uphold pack law, to execute me and anyone who helped me, to send a message that bloodlines and hierarchy and obedience matter more than anything else. Or you can vote to change the system. To say that we judge wolves by their actions, not their heritage. To take the first step toward the world my father envisioned, one where power comes from trust, not from fear. Elder Hakawakawa stood. The time for testimony has ended. Now we vote. Every adult wolf present will approach the ceremonial stones. Place your hand on the white stone for execution, on the black stone for mercy. The council will tally the results. For the next hour, wolves filed past the stones in silence. Karipa watched their faces, trying to gauge which way they were leaning. Some wolves looked at him with sympathy but voted white. Pack law was too deeply ingrained. Others voted black but wouldn't meet his eyes, ashamed of defying the council. When it was Aroha's turn, she stood before the stones for a long moment. Her hand hovered between them, trembling. Then she placed it on the white stone. Execution. Even knowing it was coming, even understanding her reasoning, It still felt like a knife to the heart. Pakura voted black. Ringi voted black. Wetu voted black, and so did her cubs who'd just reached voting age. Tain, the guard who'd spoken up in the dungeon, voted black. But so many others voted white. Wolves who'd served under Karipa, who'd benefited from his leadership, who'd watched him pour everything he had into protecting the pack. They voted white because pack law told them to, and 40 years of conditioning was too strong to overcome. Finally, the last wolf voted. The council began counting. The wait was agony. Elder Hakawakawa's face revealed nothing as she tallied the results. The other elders watched, some with satisfaction, others with uncertainty. Then she stood and addressed the crowd. The vote is complete. 1,012 wolves voted for execution. 1,009 voted for mercy. 3 votes. They'd lost by 3 votes. Marama's hand tightened in his. Pakura made a sound like he'd been physically struck. The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs. According to the results, Hakawakawa continued, her voice heavy. Alpha Karipa will be executed at dawn for the crime of carrying a forbidden bloodline. All wolves who aided him will also face judgment. Wait! A voice cut through the chaos. Aroha stepped down from the platform, walking toward the ceremonial stones. I want to change my vote. Tumatawenga's face went purple. That's not how this works. The vote is final. The vote isn't recorded until you announce the final decision, Aroha said. Her voice steady despite the tears still on her face. Elder Hakawakawa hasn't made that announcement yet. I'm changing my vote to black. Mercy. Hakawakawa's ancient eyes filled with something that might have been hope. Luna Aroha, you understand what this means. You'll be defying the council's wishes. You'll likely lose your position. I understand, Aroha said. And I don't care. I made one choice out of fear. I'm making this one out of love. She looked at Karipa. I can't undo what I did to you. I can't take back the poison, the imprisonment, the betrayal. But I can do this. I can choose you over pack law, even if it's 3 months too late. The crowd was silent, barely breathing. Hakawakawa recalculated. With Luna Aroha's vote changed, the tally is 1,011 for execution, 1,010 for mercy. Still in favor of execution by 1 vote. 1 vote. They were going to die over 1 vote. Then Elder Hakawakawa herself stepped down from the platform. Then I change my vote as well. From execution to mercy. The final tally is 1,010 for each option. A perfect tie. Tumatawenga exploded. You can't do this. You're the council. You're supposed to uphold pack law, not destroy it. I'm upholding something more important, Hakawakawa said calmly. I'm upholding the memory of my daughter, who gave her life to save this wolf when he was still in his mother's womb. I'm upholding the belief that maybe, just maybe, Tawiri was right about some things. And I'm upholding my own conscience, which I've ignored for far too long. She turned to the crowd. In the event of a tie, pack law grants the deciding vote to the eldest living council member. That would be me. And I vote for mercy. Alpha Karipa and all who aided him will be pardoned. Furthermore, I propose that we establish a new precedent. From this day forward, no wolf will be condemned for their bloodline alone. We will judge by actions, not by heritage. The other elders looked stunned. The crowd erupted. Some cheering, others protesting, everyone shocked. Tumatawenga pointed a shaking finger at Hakawakawa. You've just destroyed pack law. You've undone centuries of tradition. I've made a choice, Hakawakawa said firmly. The same choice we made. The same choice Marama made. The same choice we all should have made 40 years ago. And if that destroys pack law, then perhaps pack law deserved to be destroyed. She looked at Karipa. You're free, Alpha. Truly free. No more dungeons. No more chains. No more living in fear of your bloodline. Karipa couldn't speak. Couldn't move. 3 months of darkness and pain and despair. 8 hours of uncertainty and fear, and now. Marama threw her arms around him, and he held her tight, feeling tears on both their faces. Pakura embraced them both. "Brother, you did it. You actually did it." But as the celebration began to spread through the crowd, as wolves who'd voted black crowded forward to congratulate him, Karipa noticed something. Aroha was walking away, lone. Her shoulders hunched, her head down. He extracted himself from the celebration and followed her. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, staring into the dark forest. "You don't have to say anything," she said without turning around. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed what we had. You also saved me at the end," Karipa said quietly. 3 months too late. She finally turned to face him. "I told myself I was protecting the pack, that I was being responsible, that I was making the hard choices Aluna had to make. But the truth is I was protecting myself, my position, my place in the hierarchy. And I sacrificed you to do it." She wiped at her tears. Marama was right. She stood by you when it mattered. She risked everything without hesitation. That's what real love looks like. What I felt for you, what I still feel for you, was conditional. It existed as long as it didn't threaten my power. Karipa didn't contradict her. 'Cause she was right. "I'll step down as Luna," Aroha continued. "Marama has the blood oath. She's earned the position more than I ever did. And you," her voice broke, "you deserve someone who would choose you even when the world tells them not to." Karipa reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "I don't hate you, Aroha. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but I don't hate you. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. Maybe there was no right answer." "There was," she whispered. "I just didn't have the courage to make it." She stepped away from his touch. "I'll announce my resignation tomorrow. The pack needs time to adjust to everything that happened tonight. But Marama will be a good Luna. Better than me. She already loves you the way I should have." Before Karipa could respond, a howl split the night air. Not a celebratory howl. A warning. Both of them turned toward the sound, their wolf instincts immediately alert. More howls joined the first, coming from the northern border of pack territory. Pakura came running. "Alpha, we have a problem. Scouts report an army approaching. Over 500 wolves in formation. They're flying the banner of the Northern Coalition." Karipa's blood ran cold. The Northern Coalition was an alliance of 12 packs that had always been hostile to the Southern Council's authority. If they were marching on Moonwater territory in formation, "It's not a random attack," Rengi said, appearing beside Pakura. "They're coming for you specifically." The scouts intercepted a messenger. The Northern Coalition heard about the vote, heard that the council tried to execute Tawiri's heir, and they've decided it's time to finish what your father started. "They think I'm leading a rebellion," Karipa realized. "They think tonight's vote was the beginning of an uprising against the council." "Isn't it?" a new voice asked. Everyone turned to see a wolf they didn't recognize stepping out of the forest. He was massive, scarred, with eyes that held the weight of decades. Behind him, more wolves emerged from the shadows. Dozens of them, all bearing the marks of rogues who'd lived outside pack law for years. "My name is Meishu," the stranger said. "And I was your father's beta 40 years ago. I survived the uprising by fleeing into the northern wilderness. I've spent the last 4 decades building an army of wolves who refused to live under the council's rule. And tonight, when I heard that Tawiri's son had finally challenged pack law and won, I knew it was time to come home." He approached Karipa, and every wolf in the clearing tensed, ready for violence. But Meishu simply knelt. "Your father's vision isn't dead, Alpha. It's been waiting, growing. And now, with the Northern Coalition marching and the Southern Council in chaos, and you standing here as proof that change is possible, now is the moment we've been preparing for." Karipa stared at this wolf who claimed to have been his father's beta, at the army of rogues behind him, at the approaching Northern Coalition forces, at his own pack still divided and uncertain after tonight's vote. "You want me to lead a rebellion," he said slowly. You want me to finish what my father started. I want you to free us, Meishu corrected. All of us. Every wolf who's ever had to choose between their conscience and pack law. Every wolf who's been condemned for their bloodline or their beliefs or their refusal to bow to wolves who inherited power rather than earned it. Your father showed us it was possible to fight. Tonight you showed us it was possible to win. Now we need you to show us it's possible to build something better. Elder Hakawakawa had approached during this exchange, leaning heavily on her staff. If you do this, she warned Karipa, if you take up your father's cause, the council will unite against you. The Southern Elders, the Northern Coalition, every pack that benefits from the current system, they'll all see you as a threat. Tonight you won mercy. Tomorrow you'll face war. And if I don't? Karipa asked. If I tell Meishu and his rogues to go back to the wilderness, if I try to pretend tonight was just about one vote for one wolf, what happens then? Then the Northern Coalition attacks anyway, Meishu said. Because they're not coming here to support you, Alpha. They're coming to destroy you before you become what they fear most. A symbol that pack law can be challenged and defeated. Whether you lead a rebellion or not, you're already at the center of one. Marama stepped forward and took Karipa's hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. We all are. She gestured to Pakura, Rengi, Wetu, and the growing crowd of wolves who'd voted black. You don't have to carry this alone. Karipa looked at them all. His brother, his allies, his new Luna, the pack he'd led for 7 years, the rogues who saw him as the heir to a revolution, the elder who'd given up everything to save him. He thought about his father Tawiri, who'd died trying to change the world. About Wee, who'd sacrificed herself to save his life. About Marama, who'd defied pack law without hesitation when she saw injustice. And he thought about the choice Aroha had given him in that dungeon 3 months ago. The choice between existing as a broken, powerless alpha or dying as a threat to the system. Tonight he'd found a third option, fighting. Not just for himself, but for every wolf who'd ever been crushed beneath pack law's weight. For every wolf who'd been told their bloodline determined their worth. For every wolf who'd had to choose between survival and conscience. His father had tried to build that world and failed. But maybe that's because Tawiri had tried to tear down the old system before building something new. Maybe the key wasn't destruction, it was transformation. Karipa looked at Elder Hakawakawa. If I do this, if I take up my father's cause, I'm not going to wage war on the council. I'm going to offer them a choice. Join us in building something better or step aside. We're going to create a system where power comes from trust, where laws are made by the wolves they govern, where bloodlines don't condemn you and questioning authority doesn't make you a traitor. He turned to Meishu. Your army of rogues, I'll accept their help, but not as soldiers in a war. As citizens in a new kind of pack. One where being rogue doesn't mean being outcast. Where every wolf has a voice. Then he addressed his own pack. Tonight you voted to spare my life by the narrowest margin possible. Tomorrow I'm asking you to take a much bigger risk. I'm asking you to help me rebuild everything from the ground up. It won't be easy. It won't be safe. Many wolves will oppose us. But if we succeed, if we actually create the world my father envisioned, our children and grandchildren won't have to choose between pack law and doing what's right. They'll live in a world where those two things are the same. The clearing was silent. Then Wetu stepped forward. I'm in. Pakura. With you, brother. Rengi. My pack stands ready. Tain, the young guard. The castle guard will support you. One by one, wolves began pledging their loyalty. Not all of them. Many were still too afraid, still too uncertain. But enough. More than enough to begin. Marama's hand tightened in his. Through their bond, he felt her absolute certainty. Her unwavering belief that they could actually do this. And for the first time since Aroha had locked him in that dungeon, Karipa felt something that had been absent for 3 months. Oh. Not the desperate, fragile hope he'd felt when Marama first found him. But the fierce, burning hope that comes from standing at the precipice of real change and choosing to leap. Elder Hakawakawa approached him one last time. Your father would be proud, she said softly. He'd also tell you that the road ahead is harder than anything you've faced so far. Overthrowing pack law is easy compared to building something better in its place. I know, Karipa replied. But I have something my father didn't have. What's that? He looked at the wolves gathered around him. Wolves who'd voted for him, wolves who'd defied the council for him, wolves who'd chosen conscience over fear. I have them. And together we're going to change everything. As the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern horizon, as the Northern Coalition army drew closer to the border, as the Southern Council scrambled to respond to a revolution they'd accidentally started by trying to prevent one, Karipa stood at the center of his pack and made a silent promise. To his father Tawiri, who'd died fighting for a vision of freedom. To his mother, who'd been executed for carrying the wrong bloodline. To we, who'd sacrificed everything to save him. To Marama, who'd proven that love could be stronger than fear. And to every wolf who'd ever been broken by pack law and told that following the rules mattered more than justice. This time the rebellion wouldn't fail. This time they would build a world worth living in. This time they would win. But in the shadows at the edge of the clearing, a figure watched the gathering with cold calculation. Tumatawenga hadn't accepted defeat. He'd simply gone to make preparations. And as he slipped away into the darkness, heading toward the council's secret meeting place where the other elders who still believed in pack law's absolute authority were waiting, he smiled. Because Karipa had made a fatal mistake. He'd revealed his entire plan in front of witnesses. He'd shown his hand before consolidating power. He'd given the council exactly what they needed to crush this rebellion before it could truly begin. And this time there would be no merciful votes. No ties. No last-minute reprieves. This time, the council would do what they should have done 40 years ago. They would burn Tawiri's legacy to the ground, along with every wolf foolish enough to follow his